presented by allaccessretail.com. Welcome to Conversations on Retail. Join Brand Elverston for his conversation with Erin Acheson, Vice President of Business Intelligence with ZeroEyes, about active shooter trends and insights related to retail safety during the holidays. Let's get started.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And for our returning listeners, thanks again for joining us for another broadcast on Conversations on Retail, Asset Protection, and Risk Mitigation. We've been doing this now, I'm going to say 2 years. And we have had, as my regular listeners know, we've had all kinds of guests, most notably, of course, from retail, but we've also had academics. We've had researchers, we've had technologists, we've had Department of Defense technologists, and the one we are very proud of is ZeroEyes is returning for a second go. We had, I believe it was Rob, probably 4 or 5 months ago on the story of ZeroEyes. And then, of course, as many of us remember, we had General Petraeus. And because me being a veteran, ZeroEyes is largely staffed. It's certainly founded by veterans. I have an affinity for that, of course. And General Petraeus shared a lot of key transitional things for the audience. And we got a huge viewing out of that because as our listeners know, this is on YouTube. You're listening to it now when we go live. So without further ado, I'm Brand Elverston. Everybody may or may not know me. Retired after 22 years at Walmart as the Director of Asset Protection Systems and Analysis and the staff. And this broadcast is very different, Erin, in that it's not same old. We're okay with a different narrative, one that may or may not be working its way into the media. And when we do find those little components, we like to expand on them and leave our listeners with more questions than answers, where they're like, I didn't look at it that way. So that is our thing. So without further ado, Erin, I'll turn it over to you. If you would give us a thumbnail on your background, and then we'll jump into our topic.
Sure thing. Thanks, Brand, for having me. I am definitely not down for the same old either. I have over 20 years in the technology space across several different iterations of what that looks like. At ZeroEyes, my function is to be the Vice President of Business Intelligence, and that covers any manner of sins. And academically, my background is in behavioral analysis and statistics. And so I really enjoy kind of digging into different data and problems. And the problem that ZeroEyes works on is both personally and professionally, obviously very important to me, which is addressing not just mass shootings, but gun violence in general. And so as we kind of continue to see gun incidents across the board rising, we naturally feel compelled as kind of our second watch and second mission to take on the idea of helping protect our spaces so that we can kind of enjoy the lives that we all work so hard to create.
Yeah, that's a great lead in, Erin. I mean, everybody knows the name ZeroEyes. Without going into a long bio on you guys, I think you were founded in 2018. Is that right? Yes. By former Navy SEALs. And, everybody says, who's your favorite client? You don't know me very well, Erin, but, I'm okay with being transparent. I'm like, it's ZeroEyes, only because of the veteran pedigree. And when I come up there and talking to Sam and the team and, Burgess, it just feels comfortable and very unique working environment up there that veterans would appreciate. It's clear we're not choked up on communications and endless PowerPoints and 38 meetings to get to a decision. It's very specific and purposed decisioning, and ZeroEyes, as everybody knows, is the gold standard in the early warning active shooter scenarios. So, Erin, I'll kick off with a couple questions, and again, we'll go where it goes. So, how and when did you begin to collect active shooter data, and why? Why is this a thing?
Oh man, it's an interesting and weird story that could probably take up more time than anybody would want to listen to. But ZeroEyes started collecting data on gun violence a few years ago because we noticed that we were having a lot of trouble finding information about specific incidents or accurate data to analyze. Like a lot of databases, what we found was that they focused on maybe incidents with 4 or more victims, or only in a very specific industry like K through 12. And so that wasn't comprehensive enough to really dig into what's happening so that we could do a better job of trying to prevent or protect people when incidents did arise.
So from 2018 founding, what is your archive, and why did you decide to do it differently? Because you do it differently, even though it's hard to get. I mean, we used to see, I don't know whether we're becoming numb to these incidents, but aside from the New York incident this week, it's almost routine. It's almost every day there is a shooting incident that would be classified as mass shooting. Why are you guys doing it differently?
I mean, we did it differently. It really became kind of like a tangled ball of yarn, right? Once you started to pull a thread, you would find something that was really interesting and you'd want to yank on it, but then something else would appear and you'd want to do that too. And so what started as kind of gun violence and mass shootings became all gun violence, which then transitioned into all gun incidents. And that's actually a completely different thing. So that meant we expanded to stuff like threats, hoaxes, swatting, misfires, false positives, all of these things. And it painted a much bigger picture of why gun violence has such a huge impact on people, communities, financial impact, organizational impact, employee retention, all of these different things. And so it also really highlighted why security measures weren't addressing the issues the way that we thought that they would. So it wasn't ever that security measures were meant to be ineffective or, positioned poorly. It was just, did we actually really know enough about the problem to address it correctly?
That's as all the listeners know, one of the struggles that we routinely face in retail is getting to root cause. As corny and overused as that term is, we often treat symptoms and then scratch our head 2 years later when the problem comes back. And we're like, how in the hell did this happen? We had X, Y, and Z. We didn't peel the onion back far enough to go to root cause and work the hard math instead of what's quick and what we can deliver to the executive team to say, hey, we're doing something, instead of we're doing something effective.
No, and it's that because it is hard, right? And you have to really be motivated to try to do that. And so to, kind of go back to what you mentioned about our veteran community, we have veteran military and law enforcement folks who really believe this as their second watch, their mission to kind of continue their protective services and their extreme pride in creating safer spaces. And so the dedication that they have and that we all as an organization have in making sure that we dive into that is what allows us to have people want to go and look at all of these incidents. To your point, we have to talk to our research team on a pretty regular basis about burnout, because to your point, reading about mass shootings and having to dive into the more than 40 analytics points that we look at for every single incident, it is disturbing and psychologically complicated for these folks, right? And so I kind of like to say that where the FBI and some of our other, partners that we work with in gun analysts leave off is kind of where we start, right? We start then at, really specific details, what happened to the gunman, what happened to the victims, where was it located and why, what was the percentage of time outside versus inside. All of these various aspects of the data help us really paint a more unique picture, but it is very labor intensive.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because if I am, Walmart, put my badge back on that I don't want to. But anyway, if I were there, data like this, when you start going through consideration of third-party providers, doesn't matter what they do, you're always going to have to go through the machinations of an ROI and, go through all the hurdles and the programs and processes to get to a trial, et cetera, and to move on. So something like what we're going to talk about and highlight for the listeners, this may help you if you're in consideration of ZeroEyes or other technologies. These are the kinds of conversations we can have that put meat on the bone rather than, like you said, Erin, going to what's available otherwise and making generalizations. And, bless the FBI's heart and all the other federal agencies and law enforcement. They do an awesome job. But like you said, this takes it one step further and we start peeling the onion back a little bit differently. How about share, if you could, who your clients are, your client base, and really by industry? Because I know you guys are really heavy in K through 12. And I work with you guys on the retail channel and some one-offs. Update us on what your all spread is, what your install base.
Yeah, by the way, I'm a native Texan and I know exactly what bless your heart means.
Awesome.
It's a personal favorite. So we protect clients, obviously, as you mentioned, in K-12 and in retail. Retail expands to cover, as we all know, a lot of different things, right? So that's grocery, shopping malls, property management that runs, a lot of different various locations, convenience stores, gas stations, cannabis and tobacco, liquor stores, a lot of different places. And one of the things that, is not necessarily something that we planned on talking about today, but I have found fascinating through the research is the number of incidents at grocery stores. It's astronomical. And it's something that I feel like because of the way that data has traditionally been compiled, we don't really know about. Because what's not happening normally is it's not normally a mass shooting where there are 4 or more victims deceased. But that does not mean that there is not a disproportionately large amount of retail incidents in grocery that have gun incidents happening. Outside of kind of that area, we have a lot of healthcare clients. So, not just hospitals, which have kind of a lot of traditional physical security for obvious reasons, but doctors' offices, outside clinics, things like that, Planned Parenthood type things, et cetera. Hospitality, casinos, and gaming, also a really big industry, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. Entertainment venues, and then shipping and third-party logistics is pretty big. So warehousing, things like that, shipping and trucking facilities. And then as well as we've got automotive, business services, so like car washes, anybody that has a lot of cash on hand, to be honest, which is strange because you wouldn't necessarily think that way because we're thinking mass shooting, we're thinking active shooter. But like I said, when we moved and expanded the reality to focus on gun incidents, what we found was that gun incidents happen all the time. To your point, when I looked at Black Friday in retail alone, we were averaging in just retail centers 2 incidents per day.
Wow. And that is a firearm brandished and...
That is a gun incident where somebody has shown up with a firearm and done something.
2 a day. One of the things in some of our conversations, and I certainly won't mention the retailer, but they brought a different use case to us. When we started talking to them, they're like, okay, I'm typically in a strip mall, so I don't own the camera systems in the parking lot or outside, but we have them. What I'm having a problem with, I being this retailer, is armed robberies, because I only have one person in the store, the clerk, maybe 2, and we have robbery problems, and it's not 7-Eleven, guys. So no, it's not 7-Eleven.
There are plenty of people that have armed robbery that aren't 7-Eleven.
And I was like, you know what? That actually makes sense. He said, I would like to know before the clerk actually is able to call 911 or push the panic button or whatever they do. And then the same thing in sporting goods stores where the use case turned into, look, I don't really have an active shooter problem. That's awesome. But I want to know when somebody's walking through the parking lot with a shotgun to come in to get it repaired or traded in or whatever. And I told him when I was on the call, I'm like, dude, I'm one of those guys now that I'm in this career field for 30 years. if I see some clown walking into any place of business without a badge and a gun, I'm out.
And that's
not gonna
exactly
do
the
it.
thing that we talk about, and this is so problematic for retail and for other places where your revenue stream is dramatically impacted by people's perception or a negative experience. And somebody walking through the parking lot with a shotgun, whether they're getting it repaired or not, can lead to deadly consequences. Somebody could be walking by and say, that's about to be a shooter. And I, like Joe Citizen, am thinking I'm doing everybody a favor by pulling out my concealed carry weapon and, taking this guy out. And these things happen. Or they call law enforcement and they say there's an active shooter outside of the sporting goods store. Panic ensues. We saw that, during back to school shopping time a few years ago in Florida, in Bradenton, a woman was getting ready to pay for her lunch, reached into her bag to pay, and accidentally discharged her concealed carry weapon. And what happened there was the entire mall was shut down during back to school weekend. And things were broken, stores were looted during the chaos, people were injured, insurance policies were filed. And all of that led to over $50 million in projected losses, not to mention the fact that those stores ended up having to repair their storefronts where glass was broken and all kinds of things. And so again, this idea that we don't know what's happening and we don't have situational awareness, which, you want to use a cliche term, but that's very real, situational awareness.
Yeah. And, in that case of this sporting goods discussion, is they were envisioning this technology as a way to enhance customer service, because they had people in the store that when somebody did bring in a firearm, they would find them and escort them because they had a vest on or whatever. And it would put at ease the other shoppers, like the Brand Elverstons who are heading out the back exit when they see that. Said, no, we could actually use this to enhance our customer service. And what you just said, the reputation and the environment, chill out. They're being escorted. The associate or whoever it is, the employee has control of the firearm. I've always labeled this the uniquely American phenomenon. Only in America does this problem persist. And I have a pretty significant international client base. And I remember one conversation with a former New Zealander who was in an executive position when I was still at Walmart. And we had an incident. It wasn't the El Paso incident, but it was before that. And he's like, I struggle to get my head around how often and how calloused you are in America. You have more guns in one county than I have in my entire country. So the international view of that is only in America. Let's shift gears. And what have you learned? The resulting strategic shift, course correction at ZeroEyes. I mean, are you guys on the same path you were that Rob explained to me, I don't know, 6-8 months ago? I know your passion is active shooter. That hadn't changed, but.
Yeah, we're still on the same path of trying to protect spaces and prevent lost lives. And honestly, lost lives is first and foremost, right? But in addition to that, it's the loss of feeling safe, the loss of feeling like we can be a part of our community, the loss of feeling like I can drop my kids off at school and not feel nervous, or that I can go to a movie theater and if I hear a door slam, I'm not worried that somebody's coming in. I am a survivor of a shooting event. And so I remember very clearly the several years of essentially PTSD, right? That goes along with then fearing being in public spaces or fearing certain sounds. That's a huge thing here. So some of the, obviously what kind of things have changed? Nothing has changed and everything has changed is kind of the short answer there. A few of the areas that I would say are kind of notable shifts are the addition of ZEO, which is ZeroEyes 1, and our new insurance area. So ZeroEyes 1 is our gun detection solution for as small as just one camera. And that came from that look at things like convenience stores, cannabis shops, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, smaller boutiques, all of these areas who said, hey, I don't need an enterprise huge solution, but I still want to protect my people. I want to protect my space. And also protect my revenue streams and make sure that I understand, hey, what can I do? And even to my insurance carriers, how can I prove that I'm taking every possible step to ensure the safety of people here on site? So, that was kind of a really big shift for us. And I'm excited that we started doing that because I think that this idea that the only people who can afford to protect spaces are going to be these like giant chains. Yes, that's for sure true. But there is such a large client base, or even people who own a franchise or a chain where that chain would be, one or two cameras at 500 different locations.
Yeah.
So that's a big space. The second thing is insurance. And that came directly from the research center, right? That was a really interesting kind of tangent we never thought would happen as we pulled threads. We discovered that a lot of times, even though there weren't necessarily fatalities, but businesses were forced to close due to either shots fired, brandished gun, a threat, an escalation of a dispute, or a false report of an active shooter. Exactly that scenario in a sporting goods store where somebody's walking through the parking lot with a shotgun, somebody sees them, calls the police, things shut down. So what happened was we knew that daily operating budgets and, kind of like daily revenue projections were going to be impacted by these events because any amount of closure time has an impact. So that business cost needed to be analyzed. So we actually worked with Lloyd's of London and now Beasley to start to provide information to like really dig into what would that look like. And through work with the Lloyd's lab, over the summer, we figured out a way to start to offer protection for folks from that operating cost and closure in the short term, right? So we know that insurance will cover a lot of these like bigger long-term situations. But in that short term, how do you stay open? How do you pay your employees if you had to have a closure? Like, what does that actually look like? And so we really started addressing that.
Bob's collaborative inventory intelligence technology is helping many retailers and CPGs such as Colgate-Palmolive, PepsiCo, Coty, and Duracell avoid lost sales, markdowns, and spoilage by streamlining their next-gen collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment process. Learn more at bops.ai.
In the industry term, duty of care. So, I've always been interested in at what point do you have an active shooter event, tragically, and you become, it's not going to be the legal term, but you become exponentially more liable because mitigating technologies were readily scalable and available. Why in the hell didn't you have this? So therefore, and a good lawyer could say you're actually negligent. And we went through that years ago, late 90s, with, I have to be measured here in what I can share, but we got introduced to that concept in the late 90s with another strategy, and it caught us off guard. We're like, wait a minute, you can't do this in every one of our stores. We put science behind what stores we do it in. Well, that didn't prove good enough because of X, Y, and Z. Lawyers, you get enough of a lawyer, you can start turning it into something it wasn't originally. But I think at some point in this environment, it becomes almost duty of care that obviously you guys are the gold standard, ZeroEyes. You had a shooting at this store. You've got a store, 15 miles away, and you've got it loaded up with this technology. Why in the hell didn't you have it in this store, which shoulda, coulda, woulda prevented? So is duty of care a thing? Have you?
Yeah, we talk a lot about duty of care, and I'm glad you brought it up because we also have these conversations a lot internally and with clients who say, I don't want to wait until the thing happens, right? Or, hey, we're coming to you because the school down the street from us or the shop across the way or the gas station 2 blocks over had an incident and we don't want that to happen. But again, it's a lot of times set off by this like proximity fear that something has happened close to you, or there's national attention on something. But Duty of care would say, if you've had a threat, if you know you have disgruntled employees, if these things have happened, or if you know that your perimeter or premises aren't necessarily protected and that like these things could happen, especially if you know that there are solutions out there and your operating budget allows it, or you could figure out a way to make that work. And you also know, like, for instance, we've had conversations with institutions where they have met with us, knew that our solution existed, decided not to move forward, and then had an incident.
Yeah.
And at that point, where does duty of care come in? And to your point, a good lawyer can turn anything into something.
Yep. Yeah, it's in my mind, it's also, and I've done several posts on LinkedIn about this a while ago. Why is something like this not considered as fundamental in a public environment as are required fire extinguishers, overhead sprinkler systems, panic bars, emergency exits, non-slip entrance mats, the little bubble things that, before you cross this, all of this stuff is mandated. Seatbelts have been mandated since, I would like to say before I was born, but in the 60s, seatbelts became mandatory in all cars. 70, 60 years ago. Why would this
it's not ubiquitous? Yeah, why it's not is, I think it's to speak not as a ZeroEyes representative, but simply as a person living in these times. I think a lot of it comes down to how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive ourselves as Americans, and saying that we live in a situation that requires gun detection everywhere, I think strikes a chord, because it forces people to really look at themselves and create a self-awareness that says, we don't live in an insanely safe situation. It is possible that anywhere we go at any time, someone could show up with a gun. We do know that the majority of incidents are escalations of disputes and therefore spontaneous, but that doesn't mean that you're not likely to be harmed or that you shouldn't have some sort of protection against that. But yeah, I think that light that it shines on ourselves in a situation, because it's a person committing an act versus fire or a car accident, which it's funny that we disassociate those things from people, because oftentimes they're created by people, especially car accidents with texting, right? Or distracted driving. Yeah. That's very much a human created problem, but we look at the seatbelt as we disassociate that from the person. Whereas with gun violence and gun incidents, you're like, well, that's humanity, and I don't want to look at that.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, my pedigree. I was in the belly of the beast, so to speak, for 22 years, and I get it. You can't do everything. I mean, that's just not financially feasible. So, not unlike the automobile industry deciding whether to do a recall or not. Is it cheaper to pay a few wrongful death lawsuits or recall 50,000 cars at $3,000 a pop? And it's unfortunately, a cold calculus on what you do. And retailers are no different than hospitals. Everybody's got to do that math and say, what is the likelihood?
Well, and that's the math that I think we have to continue to change, and that I think actuarial models and stuff are starting to really understand, which is there's a cost that's harder to put down on paper initially, which is, to your point, paying wrongful death lawsuits. Those wrongful death lawsuits could be in the millions and certainly are problematic, but the damage to your brand could cost you billions. And so it's not just that immediate cost. The long-term erosion of your brand and people's trust in you, it could be the end of your organization.
Yeah, the per incident events, and in my background, we were very good at getting those up and downstream losses. So reputational risk, merchandise, obviously the lawsuits, the real dollars that you got to write. And to say it's millions, it's tens of millions, or in some cases, hundreds of millions lost. That in a very basic Brand Elverston way, I'm like, okay, we just paid out $500 million for this lawsuit. I could have had this technology in every store for 35 years for less. That would have helped us stop or at least identify that person who dwelled under the camera for, pick your scenario, 2 or 3 minutes. That's precious time. We could have done a lockdown. We could have, there are all number of things. And when ZeroEyes detects it, and through your ZeroEyes operation centers, all largely staffed former law enforcement or military, you guys already have the cops on the way before I know what the hell's going on inside the store. And that's precious survivability time.
And I know we're talking about the operational side of it and the revenue side of it because, we feel that. And it's also often the quickest way to explain to people why this is so necessary. But also, maybe no one would have died.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Maybe no one would have died. Maybe we would not have to, talk to people's families and explain to them what's happening, with their daughter, son, brother, sister, father, mother, like all of these conversations and things that truly nobody wants to have to do. And it is funny because, when you asked about like kind of what had changed with ZeroEyes since we started, one of the things that was interesting was that when we started after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, to your point, Navy SEALs, they were like, there has to be a better solution, looking around, seeing cameras and being like, these cameras, what are you using them for? As soon as we rolled this out with schools, it was interesting because COVID hit, but we'd already gotten a lot of interest. And so people started raising their hands saying, hey, can you put this in my hospital? Can you put this in my, business, in my church, in my public park, in my community?
Military bases. Yeah.
Military bases. Once people were like, oh my gosh, you can put this on existing security cameras. Like, I'll take that right now. So, I think that concept was something that a lot of people immediately recognized as a need. And on the flip side of that, people recognize that it's potentially necessary, but a necessity that we don't want to face, right?
Yeah.
Because we think that there's other solutions to the problem, like addressing mental health or putting up metal detectors or doing all of these things. And the reality is we live in a situation where, to quote like relationship things, it's complicated. It's not one thing, right? It's layered security, layered addressing of a problem.
Yeah, and in most professional corporate security teams that I've had exposure to, obviously Walmart, but Target, Walgreens, CVS, Home Depot, Lowe's, all these guys, and it's a very close-knit community, the asset protection risk guys. All of them clearly, understand the risk being presented. It's the difficulty and the sophistication that you guys bring to the table. Let's just call it what it is. This is not something that you go to potential client with, and I've been very transparent about this online. They'll look at that and say, oh, hell, we're already doing some AI crap. We can put this on the list and we can do it too. I'm like, okay, first of all, no, you can't. Because been there, done that. And secondarily, the layer that you guys put on top is what you mentioned earlier. The risk of false positives is not a spreadsheet that spit out the wrong answer and you can go back and correct it. The risk of a false positive is catastrophic. Talk about the mall with the lady in her, firing her weapon. All sorts of things happen.
Or the kid with a paintball gun who got shot by a police officer because they'd been called in for a shooter.
Exactly. So the risk of a false positive does not occur with you guys. And that's one of the things that when I'm talking to potentials, I'm like, because they'll ask that and I don't blame them. Wait a minute. If you miss one or if you misinterpret, I got a guy in the parking lot with a hockey stick and you said it was an AK. And I did a lockdown and cops came flying and helicopters. So I just wanted to call that out. The false positives are not a point of discussion. You have some data Erin, that you wanted to share? I think it's probably now a good time to shift over and give you the screen and let you walk through what you guys do.
Yeah, well, while I pull that up, I will mention that the false positive thing is interesting because I laugh about you saying, people bringing out helicopters and, all manner of things. And it's not funny because it costs businesses, taxpayers, millions of dollars, billions of dollars each year. I think the last estimate was $154 billion, which is like an insane amount for responses for things. But it also, again, creates this, oh my gosh, I'm in an unsafe space. I don't want to come back here. I'll take my business elsewhere. I'll do things somewhere that isn't, constantly closed down because somebody mistook a hockey stick for a shotgun.
And you're putting first responders at risk. When the cops and the SWAT teams come, they're loaded for bear. They're not, so anything can happen. And you hope they're professional enough and understand the environment that they don't pop, some guy that's looking at a paintball gun in the toy department and mistake him for quote unquote the shooter. So yeah, nothing good happens from that.
They don't want to go into those environments. They don't want to be a part of that situation. They want to make sure that they're, in an environment where, hey, okay, I feel like what I'm walking into is not a complete unknown. I'll break this down really quickly into kind of two separate things. The first is that we analyzed, because right now we're kind of in the middle of the 2024 holiday shopping season, right? So I don't want to say that this is, all of this year's data. This is the 2024. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on so far in 2024, but this is 2022 and 2023 retail holiday shopping season. And it starts with Black Friday and it goes through December. So during that time, we found 162 gun incidents. And during that year period, not just Black Friday, but during that entire holiday shopping season, that was 5 incidents per day in retail spaces. Not countrywide, not in everything, just in retail.
And this is only on Black Friday.
This is Black Friday and the holiday shopping season. Okay. So this is Black Friday through Christmas.
And you had 5 a day for that span of 30 days.
About a month. About a month, 5 incidents per day. And again, what we ended up with was 140 injuries, which is 4 injuries per day, and 83 fatalities, which is 2 deaths per day in retail locations. Again, terrifying thought. And when we looked at the locations, what we found was that the majority of these incidents occurred at malls. And then we found gas stations, grocery stores, and convenience stores to bear the majority of incidents, right? After that, we kind of had standalone department stores and then drugstores and general merchandise. And then we kind of start to move down into lower likelihood. So liquor store, strip mall, tobacco, cannabis, boutique and jewelry, sporting goods stores, etc. And these would be locations that are not in a mall or in a, strip mall situation. So that would be a standalone individual location.
So let me put my analytics hat back on from my Blue Badge days. Assuming this data is normalized to install base. So in other words, if you've only got 100 grocery stores, that could distort the data if it's not.
No, this is everywhere. This isn't our clients. Okay. This is every single United States gun violence incident during that period, regardless of use of ZeroEyes or.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So
where would mass retail be in that data? Go back if you would. Department stores, I'm assuming, Walmart,
and
Target,
malls.
Home Depot.
So department store and general merchandise store would be mixed between those two, depending on how they're categorized.
Yeah, because security-wise, most of those are not part of malls. I mean, Walmart has a few that are in malls. I don't think any Home Depot or Lowe's, they might be an anchor in a strip mall, but typically they're standalone. So that means they do own the security infrastructure in the parking lot, the lights, the signing, cameras if they choose to do it, LVT towers, live view tower. Okay, good. Got it.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we actually started looking at kind of why things happened, the reality is you'll notice that sometimes we just don't know because we didn't get to talk to whoever it was afterward, and you'll see why in just a moment. But we really want to understand what's going on so that we can try to figure out what's the most effective security strategy for it, right? I mean, if you don't know what it is, then how are you going to address it? Assuming that what it is always an active shooter is actually really problematic for the fact that what do you do about the fact that the majority of it is escalations of disputes, which happen spontaneously? Nobody planned for it to happen. And so because we're not looking at a planned event, what we're looking at is a spontaneous event. Okay, spontaneously somebody pulled out a weapon, but in that moment, who captured that first? If you have cameras, we see a gun-shaped object. We make sure that we are alerting authorities, alerting the client, and starting the process of saying, this is what's going on. But it also allows you to say, we don't actually need to shut down the entire facility. This isn't somebody who's roving around with a gun looking to shoot indiscriminately as many people as possible. This was, I'm mad at you. You took my parking space. I got holiday rage. And like, now it's over, which is honestly what happens a lot, right? Like, we're laughing about it, but it's so real. It's, you took my parking space. I didn't like the way you looked at me in line. You touched my girlfriend, like whatever it is, weird stuff. And then it's over instantly. No need for shutdown. No need for full lockdown. No need for searches of every patron on your premises. Because again, we're talking about the perception. This could be over and handled very quickly. The other side of it is illegal activity, right? And drive-by shootings. And so that happens naturally, like people are drug deals, prostitution, any manner of weird stuff that's happening inside of people's brains. And then less than 1% in retail during the holiday period, again, during the holiday period, was a true active shooter. I planned to show up and kill as many people as I possibly could on premises.
Say that again, because that's important, guys, for your ROI. 1%? Say that again. I don't want to mischaracterize.
Yeah, no, less than 1% of incidents during this time period are active, what society would call an active shooter. I don't think that definition is very good. But what society would call an active shooter, which is showing up and saying, I am here to indiscriminately kill as many people as possible. That is an extremely unlikely situation. And so that does not mean that you don't have a gun violence problem. That means that the security measures that you have in place to prevent certain things from happening may be trying to address a problem in a way that's not really what you need.
That's really important, guys. Replay this or rewind a minute if you need to. Because again, Erin, if I'm considering this technology and our audience is largely retailers and a ton of veterans from around the world, this is key to helping them maybe put some specificity to what may be opaque guesswork, depending on the sophistication of the retailer. This is awesome.
And it's interesting. I'll give you a K-12 example. That's applicable to retail too, but I'll give you this example, which is what we found in K-12 when we actually analyzed active shooter scenarios was that the majority of active shooter plans that are used and the majority of technologies that schools use address what's called a frontal assault, which means I'm going to break through the doors or I'm going to like storm the premises without permission, regardless of what's happening. So that's what most people are trying to address. The problem with that is that's not even 10% of what happens. The majority of active shooters across the board, not just in K-12, but across the board, including retail, are known insider attacks, which means they know where you have metal detectors. They know how to come in a different door. So that means that if you have a metal detector at your front door, but not at your back door, then they're still going to know exactly where to go. They know what's happening and have badge access, a key card, know who works there and at what time of day. those kinds of things. This is really important when you're thinking about the fact that if you have a bunch of cameras, but nobody's actively watching them, what you need to know is the second somebody has a brandished firearm or is bringing one in from a parking lot, they're coming in. So the faster you know, the faster you can take actions, whether it's run, hide, fight, or whether it's security guards to the premises, etc.
Yep. Got it.
All right. Resolution. So this is disturbing. This is, to me, retail has the biggest problem with this across every industry that we've analyzed. And I don't know if I'm surprised, but I'm still upset. It's the vast majority of people have never been apprehended. So what fled and escaped means is that they fled and still to the time that we went and analyzed the data had never been apprehended. Fled and apprehended means maybe they were apprehended on site or maybe they were apprehended 2 weeks later. So apprehended means anything like on site at the time or a month or two down the line, somebody copped them, etc. Fled and apprehended means they tried to get away, they didn't make it, but fled and escaped. Look at that. The amount of people that manage to flee and are never found is extremely concerning because it means, one, not only can we not bring justice to the situation, but it means that that person's still out there and can do it again, and that your patrons feel unsafe because they know that somewhere roaming around is a person who has a gun that was willing to bring it into your store.
So this represents, because in most, successful is a terrible word to use, but when an event does occur, an active shooter, and they kill 4 or more, whatever the definition is, we're not talking about those because typically they wind up getting killed by first responders or they pop themselves. We're talking about the 99% on the previous slide, right? Where you just show a firearm.
Or you come in and you shoot Joe Blow because he looked at your girlfriend weird in the parking lot, or, whatever it is. But either way, it resulted in likely the shutdown, which you're getting ready to see in just a second. Outside of this,
you'll actually
see. Oh, yeah.
Can you go back and keep me on track on time, because I'm really interested in this from the analytic standpoint of understanding what is my business case if I go to corporate finance and I need $50 million.
You're about to see the closure lengths for some of these in a couple of slides. That's disturbing.
Killed by other. So as a side note, that means another person, civilian, unrelated to the incident, John Wayne's it and quote unquote takes care of the problem.
Doesn't have to be unrelated to the incident. Could be you attacked me. You didn't know I have a concealed carry weapon.
Got it.
You don't have as good an aim as I do.
Yep, sort of thing. Good. Because that was, sometimes in the schools, that debate is continuing, arming teachers, and I'll keep my opinion aside. That's kind of what I was thinking, more guns. Let's just get every citizen loaded up and the problem will be solved. Okay, cool.
You and I can have that conversation offline.
Yeah.
It'll be a fun one. So how many lives are lost? So this actually shows you fatalities by location. So this is the verticals where the majority of lives are lost. So gas stations and convenience stores actually ended up being the majority of fatalities. And what we would extrapolate from that is that that's where things like armed robbery, organized crime, criminal activity are most likely to happen. So I showed up. I wanted to get something from you. And that's exactly where I was. These are also, it should be noted, smaller, more enclosed environments. And what happens then is, as you can probably guess, you don't have as many places to run or hide, right? And so in a mall where you might be, or in like a large store like, Walmart, Target, etc., you may have space that you can get away as soon as you hear people yelling, hear shots fired. That may not necessarily be the case in a gas station.
Makes sense.
People hurt, though. Here's a fun one. It flips. The majority of people are hurt in retail and grocery stores. What you see here is that people are, because they're further away from you, they're not necessarily as likely to hit you or to hit you and kill you. So you may be wounded. You may also be wounded fleeing. or by other people who are attempting to flee, which is actually what happened in the incident that I was involved in. People were hurt while trying to shove other people like out of the way, down flights of stairs. I mean, chaos, right? Fog of war, all kinds of insanity. So really quickly, just so you can see a trend before we talk about times of closure and stuff like that, areas of concern over the last couple of years is incidents involving handgun use have escalated, which means it's harder. The reason I would say that this is an area of concern is, yes, an AK-47 or a large gun is potentially going to fire off more rounds more quickly, but it's also easier to spot and harder to conceal and get into a space for the most part, right? Handguns, if we've got one, you can get it past a lot more people. We see people walk them through metal detectors and sensors a lot. Or we see people printing them with 3D materials, as in the incident.
Took the words right out of my mouth, 3D printing in a recent event.
Yeah, I mean, so again, handgun use, I call it disturbing because of how much closer you can get to a target than what you could otherwise. Illegal activity is on the rise in terms of gun violence incidents, which is funny because we have this perception that things have somewhat gotten better in that regard as a country as a whole, but we're really not seeing that to be the case over the last few years during the holiday seasons. Domestic related incidents are going up. So over the holidays, unfortunately, the stress and pressure of holidays and family activities and things like that make domestic incidents rise. And by the way, these are domestic related incidents in retail, not in homes. We don't actually analyze anything that happens inside of residences. We only analyze things that could happen inside of public spaces. Accidental shootings and officer-involved shootings also going up. But again, officer-involved shootings, we believe, is happening a lot because of the fact that we're getting false reports. We're more scared because the overall incidents are rising. So officers are showing up ready to throw down. And suspects fleeing and escape. So, we don't want to see people escape, right? If you do something wrong, we want to hold you accountable, but we also want to make sure that you're off the street and not able to do it again. That makes our patrons feel safer. That makes our employees feel safer. Important for everybody. So, increases in incidents. So unfortunately, increased incidents in building material and garden equipment stores rose, as did clothing, accessories, shoe and jewelry, healthcare and personal care, and tobacco, nicotine, and cannabis all saw increases over the last couple of years. Decreases were actually strip malls, gas stations, and liquor stores. So while we did see those incidents continue to have problems from 2022 to now, those locations are actually decreasing, not at a huge rate necessarily, but decreasing nonetheless. This is actually just a really quick look at increase in fatality percentages. So department store fatality increase percentages are going up substantially over time, which again, as we kind of continue to dig into the data, this information will become more and more apparent. But I want to quickly get to the decreases. I'm going to skip past a little bit of this because I know we're going to run up on time. Impact on retail operations. 43% of the time, the entire facility gets closed down, regardless of what happened. So we're talking about an entire mall, an entire Walmart, an entire, car dealership, whatever it is, completely shut down, as opposed to just sectioning off a location because it was an escalation of a dispute, or sectioning off a location because it was a misfire, right? It didn't actually happen. It wasn't really a gun. It was a hockey stick, or it was a patron bringing their gun in to be serviced at a sporting goods store. When we look at this, that amount of closure time is pretty important, right? And so then a slide that's not on here, but I will mention is when you look at closure times, whether it was a partial day, a full day. And we didn't analyze that during Black Friday and holiday shopping, but we have analyzed it over like the entirety of retail, sectioned off like just a half a day, a full day, multiple day closures. In almost every instance, it's at least a full day. At least a full day, no business done for the remainder of the day, and usually a portion of the next day.
In peak season.
In peak season. Again, no one wants that. And so figuring out situational awareness to help prevent that exact problem from happening is really important. So this is the latest data. This is so far right now. This is just the Black Friday timeline. Okay. So this is not all holiday. This is just that Black Friday weekend. What happened? Just this year, there were 19 incidents during Black Friday, 4 fatalities and 11 injuries. And when we look at that comparative over the last few years, we see that it's a decrease from last year's Black Friday in terms of number of incidents, but an increase in incidents from 2022. So as we kind of start to look at this, what we can see is that we're hovering in the high teens to low 20s for the most part on Black Friday, with somewhere just south of 20 injuries. But then if you think about this, what that means is around 20 different retail locations have likely irreparable damage, like to the perception that the public has of their facility. And so 20 different locations around the country are now having to deal with the fact that during the peak season, people don't believe that they are safe in that place and may not, and they're just going to go somewhere else because they're probably not the only game in town. So that's kind of, that was that. And then right now, interestingly, just Black Friday of this year, majority was in gas stations, but then grocery stores, strip mall, retail and malls. So about 15 to 16% in malls and strip malls. And then clothing and accessory stores would make it about 21 to 22% is kind of like that sector of things. And then grocery stores, like I said, the grocery store situation is disturbing and kind of an entirely different topic to delve into at some point. And then, we see it at gas stations this year. It's interesting to know that the gas station locations were as prevalent as they were. And so we're going to kind of continue to see what happens. We do know, and we're not going to share data on this right now, but we do know that as December has worn on, incidents at malls and grocery stores have continued to escalate. So this pie chart will look very different by January 1st.
Wiliot's visibility platform connects the digital and physical worlds using IoT pixels, battery-free smart tags that push data to the cloud in real time without human intervention. Their mission is to make every single thing an agent of change, enabling ambient IoT by adding intelligence and automation to food, apparel, packaging, pharmaceuticals, and other products. Learn more at Wiliot.com.
If you had to do an executive summary, what would be your 3 top points to this data? Because Erin, this is awesome. This is really useful. So what would be those top 3 executive takeaways?
I would say that the top 3 executive takeaways are, the first is you have to think about gun violence as gun incidents. And when you think about gun incidents, that means false positives, brandished firearms, people calling in active shooter alerts, hoaxes, or swatting people. One of the things that we've seen happen in retail sometimes is that people will call in threats so that they can smash and grab or loot retail locations. Yep. And so we want to make sure that you're really thinking about what that is. And so one of the ways that something like ZeroEyes works in that instance is if somebody says, hey, we're getting calls in that say that there's an active shooter on premises, we can look around and we say, we have 400 cameras deployed at your location and there is not a gun spotted on a single one of them. And that's not to say that there's not an active shooter. We're telling you that we can't see anything happening. And so that's one side of it. Gun violence is gun incidents, and make sure that what you really understand is what you're up against. The second thing is this idea of escalations of disputes and spontaneous gun violence and criminal activity means that You need to prepare your security protocol and your employees to know that if something happens, screaming active shooter or doing something like that can cause chaos and like business, operational, and revenue harm. So you need to know what you're up against. And that awareness is going to be difficult, but training people to know that the likelihood that it's an active shooter is less than 1%, meaning that it's possible that those shots fired are going to end and be over and that person may be gone now because, as we saw, the majority of people flee and escape. Doesn't mean that you're safe. It means you may have an opportunity to try to calm people down, salvage the situation, prevent people from being hurt while fleeing, prevent the cops from smashing up your entire facility, all kinds of things, right? Also, if you're a gas station or a grocery store and, somehow you think that this is a situation that doesn't need to be either addressed or is unaffordable, that's not true, right? A lot of our folks pay less than, 50 or 60 bucks a camera. So, I think that this is one of those things that we can safely say that closure and operational loss and like brand deterioration and things like that are well worth that expenditure in your operating budget, and should be considered.
I'm looking at the other topics we wanted to discuss, but I can't think of anything I could ask you that would make this more profound, what you've shared. So I want to kind of close it out with, this is phenomenal, Erin. And I'm kind of in the saddle. I mean, I'm not you guys, but I do work with you, and it is a thing. And I've learned a ton of useful information that in my previous life would have helped position me much more effectively when trying to get solutions on board. Because believe it or not, even with the sophistication of some of the biggest retailers, there's still a degree of guesswork on some of these kinds of more opaque events. It's not like sales. I can tell you within 3 seconds how many tubes of toothpaste I sold around the world. But I can't tell you anything about causes of shrink, even though it's a real number, or some accidents, how many. Anyway, it gets really muddy. So this is really quite helpful. So thanks for that. Number 2, are these slides or is this data going to be publicly available? You knew I was going to ask that. So
we actually published the report, so I threw it into a presentation format, but it's actually in a formalized report, and we're going to release the 2024 data and a full recap of all of this in early January. So you'll be able to see 2022, 2023, and 2024. The 2022 and 2023 data is already available on the ZeroEyes website, and I'll make sure that you have it to share with your viewers as well. And then, we also publish a lot of our data in real time. And so every single day, we have thousands and thousands of incidents that we have already analyzed across several different industries. And that data is available in real time in our Gun Violence Research Center on the site. And so if you ever want to look at and see, exactly what we're looking at and starting to dive into, you can go there. And we want people to ask questions and we want people to try to poke holes in stuff, because honestly, that's how we make these discoveries that lead us to saying, wow, as it turns out, gas stations and grocery stores are having a really big problem, but shopping malls bear the brunt of the fiscal problem because they shut down an entire mall, which is several stores, and potentially off-site locations, right? So when we look at who bears the brunt of fiscal problems, we see a lot of different things. So when you think about your parking structures, parking garages, all of these things, I remember in the incident that I was in, the parking garage got closed and I couldn't access my car for a long time, right? Which had a bunch of wisdom in it.
Good point. So your title at ZeroEyes?
Vice President of Business Intelligence.
Okay. So yes, I would love to be able to do a separate post. So we'll do this when it comes out, and the listeners are already listening. But again, put my badge back on. If I am a potential end user, I need this data. So beyond going to the ZeroEyes website, this holiday season's report will be out in January, but 22 and 23 is already out on the ZeroEyes website. Keep me in the loop on this, Erin, because I do have as you can guess, a massive following, not only on LinkedIn, but otherwise. And I want to make sure that this is in front of everybody because new money comes available in the new fiscal year, depending on what retailer you are. So these things have a habit of coming back to say, okay, we got a new bucket of money. Can we start relooking this? So thank you so much, Erin. This is awesome. That's the only word I can come up with. This is really well presented, articulated, and put into a position where if I'm a potential end user, it makes sense. And this is quite good. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. Obviously, this is both a personal and professional passion of mine. I'd love to dig in at some point on the ROI modeling that we've done and the insurance side of things, like to help people actually substantiate and make that case, but to also truly understand the financial impact that this has on their business. Because one of the things that we do know is we all know that lost lives and injuries are extremely upsetting. And I don't want to diminish that at all because there aren't really words that can describe that. What I will say is when you impact financial structures, especially for retailers, I mean, imagine in small towns and things, right? Where it's not just where you go to shop, it's also where your brother works or, what employs the majority of your count. When you impact their finances and they either have to close or lay people off or have issues, that has ripple effects across your community, potentially forever. And so we see home prices depressed in places that have shooting problems. And so dropping home prices means that you can't sell your house and get out, or people don't want to move to your area. We see quality scores start to decline. All of those things hurt people. It actually increases the rate of divorce in places where they've had shooting incidents. And so we'll see that over the 5 to 7 years following it, more domestic violence happens because people are stressed. Stress does terrible things to people.
This is awesome. So thank you very much, Erin. Have a great data-driven holiday. And we look forward to your results in January. But thank you so much. And for all the listeners, if you have any specific questions, Erin, I'm going to assume, I know you're active on LinkedIn, but they can reach out to you to have a private conversation. For obvious reasons, a certain client may want specific data. So, okay, thanks very much and have a great holiday, everybody. Thank you again, Erin. Appreciate it.